I was praying that they would save him.
This is a personal thing.
The guy shot him twice and then said, remember me, bitch.
We have two names. We have no idea who they are.
If they go inside, we know we will have them at that point.
Their adrenaline is going. It was very exciting.
Without the surveillance in this case, we'd have been left with just names.
He asked me where I left the gun.
It was the biggest nightmare I've ever had in my life.
Father of three, Rodney Thurber repairs computers for a living in the apartment he shares with his girlfriend, Nadia Cole.
This one, huh?
Perfect, yes.
I met Rodney in 2016 through an ad for a room. Just a very sweet and generous man. He loved spending time with his kids. I needed some help and I needed a place to stay. We just hit it off.
Do you want to?
Yeah.
Rodney liked working on computers. He was teaching me how to put them back together, how to take them apart, how to replace things that didn't work. He was a very smart man. He was constantly reading anything and everything. He had a very high IQ. We had fun together, especially learning the computer.
It's good now.
He made it fun. We connected very well. That day, we were just kind of lounged around all day. We were gonna watch a movie and just sit and talk. It was just gonna be the two of us. But we didn't get very far with it.
I need an ambulance.
Hold on, stay in line, stay in line.
Our dispatch received a 911 call about a shooting. The calling party was very hysterical, very emotional. There was yelling in the background.
Moments later, dispatch receives another call about the same incident.
Kansas City 911.
Someone got stuck. Someone came here and shot this guy.
The shooting had occurred in the second story of a converted house.
Do you know him? The person who was shot?
Yeah, Rodney, he's our neighbor. He just got shot in here. Can y'all come, please? He's losing consciousness.
Officers were dispatched to the scene where the shooting had occurred.
115 or 117 are almost in.
Officers arrived at Tracy Avenue where the 911 call came from. There were witnesses that were downstairs waiting for police. Officers go up the stairs to the top apartment and locate a female and the victim. He is laying in a pool of blood and was not conscious when officers arrived. As medics arrive and police are still rendering aid, unfortunately, Rodney succumbs to his injuries and is pronounced deceased at the scene.
I was praying that they would save him. That there's no way he could die. That man is too stubborn to die. He's gonna live forever. He loved us.
A homicide investigation was initiated at that point.
Ma'am, can I get your name, please?
Our calling party, who was identified as Nadia Cole, she was very emotional.
Officers removed Nadia from the scene. She is clearly distraught after seeing Rodney die.
She's placed into a warm police vehicle where an officer sits with her, tries to console her as best they can. Officers got brief statements from the downstairs neighbors who had kind of described hearing Mr. Thurber yelling. He shot me, called police.
Can you describe his features? How old? How tall?
No, sir. I know he was a white male.
They gave us a description of a male running from the scene, but as far as specifics, it was very difficult. None of them were able to give us a very good description.
Homicide detectives arrive on scene at 6:50 p.m.
What you got?
I was the first investigator there. Mr. Thurber had suffered at least 2 gunshot wounds, one to his right side, one to the left shoulder. There was some damage to the back door where you could tell it had been kicked. We found a shoe print. That led me to believe that this is a personal thing. He knew what he was going there to do. He knew who he was looking for and what his intentions were.
I was the on-call prosecutor, so I arrived on scene and made contact with the detectives that night.
We ID'd the victim, got a witness to the shooting, and possible shoe prints of the suspect.
The evidence that we were looking for were shell casings, spent bullets, things like that. There was an actual spent bullet that had lodged itself in the door.
There were 4 shell casings that were recovered. They were a .380 caliber casing.
Any sign of the murder weapon?
We determined that the suspect probably took the firearm with him because it was not found on scene as we were processing Mr. Thurber's apartment. We located a cell phone in what we determined was his bedroom. It was taken back to police headquarters for processing and downloading of information. If you can get into it, it's gold because you know who they've been in contact with and what might have caused this to happen. We now had shell casings, a spent bullet, this shoe print, and now, we found Mr. Thurber's phone. So we have a lot of really good leads to go on. We start to look for possible surveillance cameras and the house directly north of where Mr. Thurber's residence was. There were surveillance cameras that were on the house. I was optimistically excited.
The investigators take the footage from the neighbor's camera to the police department for review.
You're just nervous and hopeful that the footage is actually captured on the camera.
Okay. Queue up 5 minutes before the 911.
I was excited because it captured the actual driveway that someone would have had gone down to get back to Rodney's apartment. We knew if it's a car, if it's a person, we're gonna capture something.
Hold it. Show that again.
About 2 minutes prior to the 911 call, a figure walks down the driveway. This is so close in proximity to the shooting that this is probably our suspect.
Punch in. Pause it.
Quality of the footage was not great, but it was enough to give us a figure wearing a coat, walking down the driveway at 6:11 p.m.
Stay on.
This figure, it cuts through a gate and into the driveway to where Mr. Thurber's apartment is.
Keep going.
Approximately 6:14, which is about the time the 911 call comes in, the video captures what appears to be that same individual. They don't exit and go the way that they came. They turn and go the opposite direction towards Manuel Cleaver 2 Boulevard.
That's our perp, 100%. Anything happen before the man arrives?
We went back approximately an hour and watched the video to see any comings and goings of anyone that was coming to or leaving the apartment. Approximately 5:39, we observe what appears to be a gray or silver BMW that pulls into the drive. Approximately 8 minutes after, we observe the same vehicle leaving, but going southbound towards Manuel Cleaver 2 Boulevard. The fact that the car turns and goes the same direction that our suspect leaves, it does kind of pique our interest. Does this car have something to do with this crime?
Rewind. Punch in on the plates.
Unfortunately, because of the lighting and the way that this camera is set up, we couldn't make out the front or the back license plates on it.
Investigators switch gears. They interview Nadia Cole to unlock any clues she has about who shot her boyfriend.
We have to be able to determine if they have information that's relevant to the shooting. We also have to eliminate them as a possible suspect.
Okay. So then just kind of walk me through what happened.
I was here, I knocked at the door, and just went, and we weren't expecting anybody, so Rodney came with me. I went to open the door, and Rodney says, "Don't open it." And no more than he said that, I already had it open, and the guy shot him twice, and then said, "Remember me, bitch." Rodney says, "Who are you? Tell us your name." And you see, I'm Patrick and Caitlin's boyfriend. And then shot him again.
So now we have two names. We have no idea who they are.
That was very odd. It's not very common that we were able to get an information like that from a shooter in real time.
Does that make sense to you? Some dude's gonna come up and murder your boyfriend, but he's gonna tell him his real name?
He's not real bright, apparently.
And describe it for me.
Long, shoulder-length brown hair. Kind of looked like he hadn't brushed it in days. Long brown beard. Big, heavy coat.
When she was asked, had she ever seen him before, she said, I had never seen him. I didn't know who he was. Not only do we have Patrick's name as our shooter, but we also have Caitlin. We asked Nadia, do you know Caitlin? And she says, I've seen her a few times.
Tell me all you can tell me about Caitlin.
She's white, blonde hair, blue-eyed, girl next door look.
Okay, what's Caitlin's last name?
I don't know.
She only knows her name is Caitlin. She doesn't know her last name. She doesn't know where she lives.
She believed that Rodney and Caitlin had at one point had some kind of a romantic relationship. And now Nadia is in a relationship with Rodney, and that raises the question for us, is there a jealousy aspect to do with this?
One of the weird things Nadia tells police is she says Caitlin had come over prior to the shooting and had left this little handgun and asked her to hold on to it.
So tell me how Caitlin came to have you hold this gun for them, for her.
She came over 2 or 3 days ago. She asked me if there was somewhere she could put it until she could come back and get it.
And why did she want you to keep it again?
She didn't really say.
When Nadia gave us the information about holding the gun for Caitlin, obviously it raised some questions. A reasonable person would be like, why am I holding this gun for you? She could never really answer us other than, well, because Rodney said it was okay.
You see Caitlin today?
Yeah, she came to pick up the gun.
So about 30 minutes before the shooting, Caitlin arrives at Rodney's apartment. Rodney gave her the gun, and she left.
Given the odd circumstances surrounding this gun, detectives ask Nadia if she's involved in the shooting.
There's a lot of stuff that is not getting told right now, okay? And I don't know why you're keeping some things from me, Did you shoot Rodney?
No.
Okay.
I would never shoot him.
Okay.
Did Nadia have something to do with setting this up? Because, well, if I can't have him, then nobody's gonna have him, type thing. For us to be able to eliminate her as a suspect, we asked her to download her phone, and she, without hesitating, said, absolutely, I will cooperate.
Detective Wells informs Rodney's family of their loved one's murder.
The hardest part of any homicide investigation or death investigation is making contact with the family. It was very emotional for them. Of course, they wanted more answers than I could give at that time.
While investigators wait for the report on Nadia's phone data, they hunt for sources of surveillance footage in the area around Rodney's apartment.
At the end of the block, right on Emmanuel Cleaver 2 Boulevard, they had just built a McDonald's, which we knew was going to have some kind of surveillance cameras.
Back at the police department, investigators review the camera footage from the day of Rodney's murder.
Knowing that our suspect had run south towards the McDonald's, we were hopeful that we could find footage that would show this individual on any of their cameras.
He came from Tracy Avenue. Do you have any cameras pointed that way?
We were focusing on the camera that is facing the Tracy Avenue, overlooking the McDonald's parking lot.
He was seen at the house around 6:14 p.m., so play from that.
We wanted to see, around the 911 call, if there was going to be an individual that was walking south on Tracy.
Punch in.
And around 6:14, we see an individual appear walking south on Tracy.
Hold it.
He's wearing the exact type of clothes that was described by Nadia as our shooter, coming from the exact direction of our crime scene.
It's the guy who was at Rodney's apartment.
Play on. Change cameras. Zoom in.
Can you enhance it?
We're unable to see the actual face of the suspect.
Switch angles. Where's he going? Any other cameras facing that way?
He ends up heading north and runs across the street and off camera, and we lose sight of him through the camera angles.
It's frustrating because I still can't say who he is.
Investigators continue to watch the footage in case the suspect returns.
Play on. Rewind that. Stop.
About 30 seconds after the suspect leaves camera view, when we see a silver sedan, similar size, make, and model of our suspect car from the previous footage.
Change cameras.
What are they waiting for?
3 minutes passed, and the car's just sitting in the parking lot.
Show me the other angles.
And then we see our suspect. He starts running across the street back towards the McDonald's.
Punch in.
His coat is now open, his hood is off his head, and we see his long brown hair. We see facial hair.
Follow him.
actually runs up to this silver sedan. He gets in the passenger seat. The BMW backs out and leaves the parking lot. Now, the suspect, similar to the description that Nadia had given during her statement. However, we still don't have a license plate for the BMW. We still don't know who Caitlin is. And all we have for him is his name is Patrick.
This is all after the murder. The car was seen at the house 30 minutes before.
We wanted to rewind the McDonald's footage and look back towards that 5:48 time period where that sedan left the victim's house and drove south on Tracy.
Okay, jump back half an hour. Okay, stop there.
About a half hour prior to the murder is when we see the sedan drive through the McDonald's parking lot.
That's the same car.
It drives up and it gets in line at the drive-thru. We are very excited because we think we actually might see who's involved in this.
Show me the payment counter. Punch in.
We're able to see who the driver is. It's a blonde-haired female, matching the description that Nadia gave us of Caitlin.
Show me the other cameras.
We can see that there is an individual sitting in the passenger seat. Unfortunately, we're unable to see his face.
Switch to the other camera. Punch in on the car tag.
We can determine that it is a temporary tag, which is issued when you buy a car, but it's not visible. We've gotten to a point where we've collected all the information that we can get from the surveillance video.
We were able to download Rodney's phone. And in that phone, we were able to locate text messages on the day of the homicide between Rodney and an individual who identifies herself as Kate.
Okay, look at this.
This Kate individual is talking with Rodney about coming over and picking up a gun. He was very specific about she needed to get this gun back from him, that her boyfriend was going to be mad if she didn't get it back.
Fits with what Nadia said.
All we have is Kate and a phone number. At the disposal of law enforcement are many systems, including databases. We put the number in and it comes back to someone with the name of Caitlin Riffle. Once we had that, then we start using analysts to help us to find a Facebook account.
Got you.
The photographs are kind of similar in appearance to the female that we see at the McDonald's in the drive-thru surveillance. This was another huge break in the case. But the text messages weren't the only thing we recovered off Rodney's phone. There was a photograph of a gun, a .380. We knew that we had .380 shell casings at the scene.
Can you get a serial number off that?
Some of it.
Zooming in on the serial number itself, we were able to read most of the serial number in this photograph that was on his phone. However, the first character was kind of distorted. That information was sent to detectives in our illegal firearms squad.
Hey, it's Detective Wells. I'm gonna send you a serial number I need to trace on. Thanks. Wow, look at this.
There were multiple photos of a silver BMW, and there were text messages connected to Caitlin asking him to try and sell this silver BMW. Not only did he have photographs of a .380 caliber handgun, the same type of caliber that was used to kill him on his phone, but also photographs of the same type of car that his murderer and accomplice used.
Hold on.
Detective Wells notices there's a temporary tag on the back of the car, and this temporary tag has the VIN number.
I'll look up the partial.
He rushes through the police database to see if this VIN is associated with any police reports.
Got it.
It was determined that car was stolen 5 days prior to the homicide.
It's been found.
We got lucky. The day after the homicide, this car was abandoned in a Walmart parking lot in Lee Summit, Missouri.
It's possible that the security cameras at the Walmart captured images of the suspect and Caitlin. Investigators make the 21-mile journey to Lee Summit to review the store's surveillance footage.
We're trying to get a better look at the suspect's face. They have surveillance video that covers their parking lots, which is where the car was dumped.
Stop. Zoom in.
The male subject gets out of the passenger seat.
Which is the next camera? He's heading towards the store.
The subject walks towards the doors of the Walmart.
If they go inside, we know we will get clear images of their face. We know we will have them at that point.
He's heading towards the store.
He's just strolling into Walmart like it's any other day.
Next stop. We got him.
I was excited, but I knew that there were still additional steps that we had to take to prove that this is Patrick.
Follow.
We track this individual we know as Patrick now through the Walmart.
Track him to the till.
He ends up making a purchase.
Can you pull up that transaction record?
He buys a tea, and we're able to track that purchase. Walmart gives us the point-of-sale receipt and tells us that he used a gift card to make that purchase.
Do you know where he got the card?
The gift card was purchased 21 hours earlier from a different Walmart in Independence, 9 miles north of Lee Summit.
This transaction for this gift card occurred 2 hours after the homicide.
Thank you.
Detectives are able to recover the footage from the Walmart in Independence.
Okay, start with the camera over the parking lot. Okay, the transaction was for 8:50 p.m., so let's play about an hour before that.
Around 8:09, we're able to see this silver sedan BMW pull into the parking lot.
Play on.
A female gets out of the car.
Freeze it there. Punch in. Is that Caitlin?
This female takes 2 children inside. And then we see another person get out of the car and walk towards the front door.
Switch to inside.
As the doors open, we start watching the interior cameras.
It appears to be Caitlin with her 2 kids walking in the store.
And we see our suspect.
He returned something and they were not able to give him cash. They gave him a Walmart gift card.
Follow him outside.
Patrick walks back to the car. Caitlin follows minutes later.
This footage shows that Caitlin is with this individual after the homicide, just like she was prior to the homicide.
Investigators check in with Rodney's girlfriend, Nadia Cole, to see if she recognizes the woman from the surveillance footage. Nadia is staying in a hotel for her own safety.
I presented her with some photographs that we had taken from the surveillance video at the McDonald's in the drive-thru. And without hesitating, she said, yes, that is Caitlin. That's the Caitlin I know that Rodney was in contact with.
Police also show Nadia the images of the gun.
When the detectives showed me a picture of it, I recognized it, and it looked similar to the one she had handed me.
Thank you. This has been extremely helpful.
The detectives are closing in on the suspects, but Nadia is feeling the toll.
I didn't have anybody to talk to, so I was left on my own. I was mad, I was hurt, I was scared. It was the biggest nightmare I've ever had in my life.
Investigators know that Caitlin is Caitlin Riffle. They now need to identify Patrick.
One of the items that we found on Rodney's phone was the photo of the .380 handgun. We were able to trace the serial number on the gun. We were able to determine that it was legally purchased at a store in Lee Summit, Missouri by Stephanie Powell.
Can you look her up?
Look at this.
She has a son by the name of Patrick Powell.
Can you pull up his license?
Photo's old.
When we run his Missouri Department of Revenue driver's license photo, he has short hair. In the surveillance video, the suspect had long hair. So our first thought is, has he changed what he looks like, or is this a completely different person?
Investigators search for a link between Caitlin and Patrick Powell.
There is an application on a computer that shows when anyone pawns something.
Got a hit on Caitlin's phone.
It showed that she had sold a phone at a kiosk at another Walmart in Independence that takes a picture of your ID, and it showed the date, the time that the transaction was made. There was surveillance video of her selling the phone with a person that did resemble very much the photo that Patrick had for his driver's license. He had cut his hair and shaved his face.
We were able to retrieve that phone. It was the phone that she had been using to communicate with Rodney the night of the murder.
We've gotten to a point where we've collected all the information. It's time to talk to them in regard to their role in the homicide of Rodney Thurber. I authored a court order for Patrick Powell's cellular device, and our tactical support squad found a residence where they thought the phone was at. It was tracked to Buckner, Missouri, which is about 30 miles east of Kansas City. They advised us we have Patrick and Caitlin. They're in a vehicle, and we are about to try to stop the vehicle and take it into custody. Adrenaline is going. This is all going to come to a head. It was very exciting for us.
As the officers are following his car, it ends up parking at a Quick Trip. Two individuals get out of that car. A white female looking like Caitlin and a white male looking like Patrick. As they walk towards the door at the Quick Trip, officers move in, take them into custody.
Police informed Nadia of the arrests.
I was relieved. Everybody thought I'd shot him. Every relationship has problems, but I would never hurt him.
Investigators take Patrick Powell and Caitlin Riffle to the police department for questioning.
You've been read your rights. So, why don't you walk us through what happened?
I got nothing to say.
He almost had a smirk on his face. He knew he wasn't going to talk to me.
Patrick refuses to cooperate, so detectives press Caitlin for answers.
I don't know anything about anyone being killed.
Caitlin gives a statement to police and initially denies any involvement or any knowledge of what occurred.
Can I show you a couple pictures?
Yeah.
Okay.
They confront her with screenshots that show her at the McDonald's, show her text messages that occurred, and her story evolves.
Okay, he asked me where I left the gun, and...
Who asked you where?
Patrick asked me where I left the gun, said he was going to go ask for it himself.
We finally got her to admit that they went and got the gun.
So when he comes running back to your car to get in, what did he say happened?
Nothing.
She was confronted with the fact that we had an eyewitness that says that she was in the apartment moments before the murder.
You see Caitlin today?
Yeah, she came to pick up the gun. He said after she gave the gun to you that it was a very short amount of time before there was a knock at the door.
I see this. We need a lawyer for him the question.
Caitlin asked for a lawyer, and we end the interrogation.
Patrick and Caitlin are charged with first-degree murder. Both plead not guilty. At the trials, prosecutors step through the events that led to Rodney Thurber's murder.
The day of the homicide, Caitlin and Rodney had been texting. They had been texting about this gun. They were texting about her coming over and getting this gun. And we know the surveillance shows her car pulling that driveway. We know Nadia Cole says Caitlin came in that house, got that gun. We know that that silver car with Caitlin in the driver's seat and a male in the passenger seat went through that McDonald's drive-thru.
Patrick walks to Rodney's home minutes later.
Patrick went over there on foot, by himself, armed with that handgun. He knew he was going to shoot Rodney.
The gun that we know Caitlin gave back to Patrick was a .380 handgun, the same caliber that matches the shell casings that were found at the scene. We know that individual ran away. Ultimately, he got into that silver car that Caitlin was waiting for him to drive him away. Just 2 hours after the homicide, we catch them on the Walmart surveillance in that same silver BMW. Patrick wearing the same clothes with the fur on the coat, the pink shirt, and the green pants inside that Walmart.
The shoe print found at the crime scene matched neither suspect, but the pictures of the gun and the car that Caitlin sent to Rodney incriminated both her and Patrick. Stephanie Powell, the gun's legal owner, had no involvement in or knowledge of any criminal activity.
When trying to establish a motive in this case, we weren't exactly sure why.
Maybe Patrick's jealous of Rodney because of the relationship that he and Caitlin had previously.
I think he was trying to keep them two apart. He was jealous over the relationship that Rodney and Caitlin had.
It's clear from all the evidence that Nadia Cole was just an innocent bystander. She was a crucial witness for us in this case. Patrick Powell was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for murder in the first degree and 10 years for armed criminal action. Caitlin Riffle was sentenced to 20 years for murder in the second degree and 3 years for armed criminal action. This murder wouldn't have occurred but for her actions. She was the getaway driver. She's the one that provided the murder weapon. but ultimately she's not the one that pulled the trigger. Without the surveillance in this case, we'd have been left with just names. We would not have been able to put our suspects together in the moments after the homicide.
I never said goodbye to Rodney, and I'm not going to. But I still talk to him. He's still a part of me. He's still a part of my life. I'll miss Rodney's smile. And the way he made people feel. He was a great man that loved helping others.
Next time on See No Evil.
My sister has been missing for almost 5 days now.
There was more to this than just a missing persons case.
We're certain that some type of foul play has been involved.
We knew that they were lying because of the CCTV.
Night air, sodium orange, the hum of a cul-de-sac that sleeps with its porch lights on and its secrets locked under vinyl siding, and there, at the end of a driveway in a nice part of town, a single sneaker lies on its side like a dropped sentence. The clock on the VCR reads 2:11 a.m. The dog won't stop barking. A neighbor peeks through a slit in the blinds, the kind of quiet that only exists just before a scream. Headline seed planted, cold case begins. The girl in the varsity jacket never made it home. The phone rings at the precinct. Someone says missing. Someone says last seen. Someone says she cut through the back lots to save 3 minutes. 3 minutes became 30 years. Ohio, now 97. Streets named after maples and elms. The kind of town where the ice cream stand opens the week after school lets out, and the sheriff waves at the parade in a convertible he doesn't own. The kind of town that believes in attic angels and lawn geese, and the security of knowing the man next door. The night swallows its evidence without a trace. Patrol cars glide, tires whispering, radio chatter a heartbeat. They cordon the path behind the car wash. Cattails bow like parishioners. Dew turns the grass into 1,000 tiny mirrors, each one reflecting a blue strobe. A lab tech photographs shoe prints that don't match the sneaker. A detective picks up a torn movie stub, pockets a breath mint wrapper, mutters that nothing is nothing and everything is something if you turn it over long enough. Headline, in waiting, Matt Tick Beon. The parents sit at the kitchen table. Coffee burns on the hot plate. Friends cycle through with casseroles and theories. They talk about the belligerent ex-boyfriend, the older man seen with her by the lake, the rumor she owed someone money, the unnamed someone with a temper, the whispered name that floats around like thistledown and never lands. A reporter stands in the driveway and says, "Live," but the satellite truck leaves before dawn. The town closes in. Posters bloom on telephone poles like a rash. The pastor says hope. The aunt says prayer. The detective says time, and time says nothing back. Week 1, canvas. The mailman remembers a shadow by the hedge. The night shift cashier remembers a girl buying gum. The retired teacher remembers a figure in a dark jacket, tall, polite, vanished like a thought you swear you had. The path behind the car wash gives up a few fibers and a smear. Labs hum. The case file fattens. A name pops up more than once. The neighbor across the street, former patrolman, face like a granite stamp, eyes the color of road salt after a thaw. He carries himself like procedure. He says he saw nothing, heard nothing, knows the girl's family, used to throw a baseball to the little brother on Sundays. He smiles with half his mouth. He knows how to answer questions that are really traps. He keeps his lawn immaculate, as if a blade out of line would be a confession. Another name pops up, the drifter who camped by the river for a week and then vanished. Another name, the manager at the video store whose receipt times don't quite match his memory. The case becomes a carousel. Detectives grab at horses as the music spins, lead, 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 none of them stopping. Summer breaks on the town. The cold case isn't cold yet. It's feverish. Volunteers sweep ditches and sift leaves. The sneaker is bagged and labeled. The parents hold a vigil, candles making everyone look like saints or suspects. The camera lingers on tears. A thunderhead on the horizon builds and refuses to break. Then the break comes, but it's the wrong kind. The river floods 2 counties over, and the lab where the samples wait loses power. Backups save most of it, not all. That smear in the path, partial. The fiber, common. The trace under the fingernail, degraded. The detective writes a line in the report that could be chiseled into stone, insufficient for comparison. The file goes on a shelf. The shelf goes to the back room. The back room grows colder year by year. The town does what towns do to survive. It edits. The ice cream stand opens. The parade rolls. A new sheriff waves. Houses are painted over. Young couples move in and teach their kids to ride bikes on the same asphalt. The missing poster fades and is replaced by a flyer for a lost cat. Headlines leave. Memory stays. The boy who once caught baseballs from the neighbor becomes a man who won't look him in the eye. People say he changed. People say the neighbor adjusted well to retirement from the force. People say a lot when they don't know anything. It becomes ritual to mention her name softly when the streetlights buzz on. It becomes an act of civic faith to believe someone will come forward. It becomes a curse that no one does. 20 years. 20 birthdays celebrated in a living room like memorial services. 20 Christmas stockings hung with an empty one in the middle, red felt with a name stitched in white. 20 years of October wind that sounds like footsteps. And then a program, small town budget, big time promise, backlog DNA testing. Headlines elsewhere talk about science turning ghosts into witnesses. A prosecutor wins a grant. Boxes are pulled, seals broken, cotton swabs resurrected under a new fluorescent glare. Old evidence meets new machines. The lab tech who was a rookie in 1997 is a supervisor now, and her hands tremble when she slides the tray into the instrument. On the screen, peaks rise and fall like a skyline. Somewhere in those peaks is a person. Somewhere in those peaks is the night that would not end. The partial isn't partial anymore. A new technique teases more signal from the noise. What was insufficient becomes suggestive. What was suggestive edges toward probative. The hit doesn't come in a blare of trumpets. It arrives as an email at 2:11 a.m. A callback to the time the VCR froze, a clock face pointed at fate. The lab flags a CODIS link. The name resolves like a photograph in developer fluid. It is not the drifter. It is not the manager. It is the man who knows how to smile with half a mouth. Ex-cop, neighbor. He had given a sample once for elimination because that's what good neighbors do. It sat in a database under a number that meant nothing until now. The peaks line up. The statistic blooms in scientific notation. The supervisor reads it twice and a third time for the weight of it. Headline: the kind that detonates. Cold case solved. DNA hit fingers ex-cop neighbor. The morning news says shock. The noon talk radio says betrayal. The evening porch says I always wondered. The man in the salt-colored eyes opens his door to a knock that he used to make. The badge in the doorway is younger than his oldest lie. He asks if this is about the break-in 2 streets over. He asks if he should get his coat. He asks nothing that matters. The cuffs click loud in a quiet house. The lawn is still immaculate. The camera crews return like migratory birds. The past empties out of closets and spreads across the grass in evidence bags. They search the garage, the crawl space, the attic full of cardboard Christmas. They find a box of clippings sheared neatly from newspapers 2 decades old. They find a receipt from a hardware store dated the week after she disappeared. They find nothing that can speak louder than the peaks on the screen. The town splits its face in 2, relief and recoil. Relief that a name is printed. Recoil that the name belongs to someone who used to direct traffic at the crosswalk with a gentle hand. Interviews Bloom. The detective, older now, stares at the camera with eyes that have counted the years grain by grain. He says the science gave them what witness memory could not. He also says there are holes, always holes, that will demand answers in court. Lawyers step into this frame like chess pieces. Words like chain of custody and stochastic effects and secondary transfer begin to thread through living rooms where the TV is always on during dinner. The headline repeats and repeats until it is both undeniable and somehow unreal. Cold case solved. But solved is a word with legal thresholds and human thresholds, and they rarely share a door. In the choir loft, a friend of the family swallows hard when asked if relief feels like justice. On Main Street, the barber says he cut the ex-cop's hair for years and never saw anything darker than a widow's peak. At the grocery store, the cashier who remembered gum now remembers the tremor in the girl's hand when she laid down her change. Memory edits again, fills gaps with story. The prosecutor practices the opening statement in the mirror, a metronome clicking. The defense rehearses a sequence of maybe and what if and contamination and alternative source. And the parents, tired, weathered, together because there is no other way to be, sit in a quiet kitchen with the hot plate off and decide what to say to the framed photograph on the counter. The voiceover breathes shallow here because this is the point where cinematic meets the weight of a kitchen chair. Zoom back to that path behind the car wash. Cattails, bowing still. The dew now imaginary, the blue strobes now archived. The shoe prints belong to people with grandchildren. The torn movie stub is a relic of a place that closed in 2004. The Breath Mint wrapper is a brand discontinued in 2001. The smear, once insufficient, is now a note in a chorus. But a chorus needs a melody and lyrics, and neither has yet been sung. The neighbor sits in County Orange. He says nothing. He knows how silence is a tactic. He knows procedure. He knows that community shock is not evidence. He knows a courtroom is colder than a back room full of boxes. He knows how to look at a jury the way a crossing guard looks at children. Steady, safe. The voiceover sharpens, becomes a headline drum. Ex-cop neighbor, betrayal, DA, hit, solved. The word solved printed in ink that still feels wet. The town exhales and inhales a new fear. If the person you trusted to take your statement becomes the person in your nightmares, who do you hand your fear to now? The reporter at the driveway says, "Live again." This time the satellite truck doesn't leave before dawn. They want sunrise on the siding. They want B-roll of ordinary evil. The camera lingers on the sneaker in the evidence photo, the one on its side, the dropped sentence. It looks like an answer now. It is not an answer. It is a period at the end of a sentence that was ripped in half. The voiceover keeps moving, no breaks, no chapters, because the town didn't get breaks or chapters. It got a long, unbroken night, and then a morning that felt like waking up in someone else's house. Cold case headline fits neatly above the fold. Solved, the word that lets you sleep. But in the space between those words, there's a hum, a subhead, not printed, the missing minutes, the unsaid things, the question that refuses to sit down in the back row. Who walks a path at 2:11 with a flashlight and a plan? Who knows the topography of a shortcut like a beat route? Who keeps a lawn perfect in a world so full of weeds? The voice lowers to a whisper, meant for a mic, very close to the mouth. Raise your hand if you ever thought the neighbor could be the monster. No hands rise, and yet. The frame blurs for a moment, as if the camera lens fogs with breath. The soundtrack is a thin line of feedback from a church PA, a child's bicycle bell from 3 houses down, the clack of a booking pen. We are here in the instant before the court gavel. The science has spoken in a language of peaks and probabilities. The headline has spoken in a language of shock and symmetry. The town speaks in the language of casseroles and caution. Somewhere, in a quiet room, the parents speak to a photograph, and the photograph, as always, is silent. The voiceover promises nothing but to keep the red light on, to keep the story unbroken, and the questions bright. cold case, shock community, DNA hit, ex-cop neighbor. The courthouse steps are a stage the town never wanted, and yet everyone knows their marks. The microphones waggle like curious birds as the van doors slide open and he appears. The ex-cop neighbor, jaw set, hair trimmed to compliance, wrists haltered in chain light. The camera irises widen. The anchors click to the word they rehearsed all night. Betrayal. And somewhere down the hill, the river lifts a thin voice of runoff like someone rinsing brushes. After painting a scene nobody asked for, because that is how mornings work here, they pretend to be ordinary while the headline crawls under the doormats, cold case solved, shock community, DNA hit. But solved has clauses and commas and lawyers in gray suits. So the voiceover stays with the detail the town keeps skipping past. The partial that once wasn't enough, now rising to song, the new chemistry teasing a human edge from a smear on a leaf, and the analyst who pressed send at 2:11 a.m., staring at her reflection in the lab glass as if it might answer the question none of the machines are programmed to handle. Why 28 years and not 28 days? Rewind the tape to the first week again, because that's where the true plot hides when the polished podium version runs out of air, flashlight arcs behind the car wash, cattails surrendering, a shoe clean as a prayer on the path edge, and a line of officers in the old brown uniforms stepping heel to toe, breathing through their mouths to keep the scent of damp detergent from settling forever. Back then, he was one of them in the periphery, off shift, just checking in, hands on hips, that neighborly squint, offering coffee from his thermos like a sacrament, citing protocol as if it were scripture. We should widen the perimeter by 50. We should put someone on the river bend. We should log the canvas again. And no one tells a former patrolman to stop being helpful. Not in a town that still writes thank you notes in blue cursive. So the scene accepted him the way a stage accepts a well-practiced understudy. And the understudy made a home in the shadow between what was looked at and what was truly seen. The parents speak in the kitchen to a detective whose tie is loosening as the evening lengthens. They hand him the scrapbook of her life because that is what grief does. When it's too early to say grief, it stacks proof that a person existed. Honor roll ribbon, softball schedule, a pressed maple leaf from last fall. None of which will ever matter to a courtroom, but all of which matters to the voice you are hearing. Because the voice needs to remember, she was not a case file, she was a cadence. And the town keeps trying to forget that cadence, so the nights will be shorter. The ex-cop neighbor shows up at the vigil and holds a candle like a man who understands ceremony. He lets wax fall on his knuckles without a flinch, and the camera captures him out of focus, behind the mother's shoulder. An accidental ghost added to the photo album decades before anyone knew they were collecting ghosts. And the reporter's voice says the words that travel like seeds on the wind. Mysterious disappearance. Community in shock. Cold case beginning to form. And the seeds root. You can still find them in garden beds today if you kneel and sift the soil. The investigation writes itself into corners and then paints the floor. A rumor about a drifter morphs into a week chasing the shadow of a man who never existed. A tip about a white pickup becomes 3 white pickups and none of them the right one. A whisper about the video store manager's receipt times animates a brief storm that rains out in silence. And all the while the neighbor mows diagonal, horizontal diagonal again, a grid so crisp it could be a chessboard. A pattern that says discipline louder than any badge. And when a detective knocks to ask about the night, he speaks in measures, not moments. He says, 9:20. I was home. At 10, I walked the dog. At 11, I watched the late local and made notes on a burglary series from the next county because habit is a muscle. And he smiles with half his mouth because a full smile would be a tell. He learned that on traffic stops where people confess with their teeth. Years sand down edges. A new chief gets sworn, a budget tightens, the boxes slide back. But the box with her name always seems to glow at the edge of vision, like the numbers on a bedside clock. There, even when your eyes are closed. And in that black room of backlog, the future is quietly gathering a tool set. not out of righteousness, but out of iteration, spectra to STR to probabilistic genotyping, words that sound like rain tapping on mailboxes. And one day, the town that believes in attic angels and lawn geese adds a new belief without noticing. That old cotton can still sing if you wire it right. When the sing begins, it's a fine filament stretched between then and now, a frequency only a few can hear, but it is enough to bring the detective back to the path in his head, enough to pull a warrant, enough to lift the floorboards of a spotless life and check what hums beneath, enough to find that in 1997 the neighbor signed out a kit late and returned it early with the wrappers aligned as if evidence were a place setting, enough to notice the garage workbench in his house has a small box of trophies, a plastic Police Week badge, a raffle ticket stub, an unlabeled key, and ask whether a souvenir is always a souvenir or sometimes a map. The arrest is the cut everyone waits for, the clack of the bracelets like a metronome snapping onto tempo. But the scene after the cuffs is longer and more revealing. The search teams floating through the rooms like slow wind, the inventory whispered, one hunting knife and oilcloth, one length of cord braided by habit. One box of articles clipped and squared from 20 years of anniversaries. Because the guilty often keep the narrator's job for themselves, they write the story on their own walls just in case no one else will, and still the defense will later stand in a wide T and teach the jury a new alphabet, transfer, touch DNA, lab contamination, stochastic effects. Because plausible doubt is a craft, and the neighbor chose craft long ago, the voiceover follows the evidence to the lab again. A second run, a third, controls immaculate, chain sealed, prosecution watching like surgeons through a glass. And the peaks arrive again in their mountain range logic, a skyline that says his breath moved close enough to hers for probability to speak in the trillions, not proof of intent but proximity turned to math. And the room feels the gravity of numbers in a way prayer scarcely manages. But the parents still light a candle when they get home because math doesn't warm a kitchen. The town's gossip machine restarts its ancient motor. The barber remembers that the neighbor never let hairs fall on his collar. The mailman remembers the way he squared the envelopes before he took them. The teacher remembers he sent a casserole when her husband had the flu. And this is how communities build retroactive intuition, by threading ordinary acts into a net they wish they'd thrown sooner. And the voice is careful here not to mistake hindsight for vision, because to indict a town with its own innocence is a cruelty. And the real indictment belongs to the quiet plan that walked the shortcut that night. Courtroom calendar set. The pre-trial motions bloom like algae. Suppress, exclude, limit, admit, and each hearing is a small weather system in a building that smells like old pencils. And the ex-cop sits still. A model defendant. A man who could pass for a juror if you changed his seat. And the prosecutor rehearses a sentence that sounds like a bolt finding its nut. The DNA beneath her nails tells you he was there when she fought, while the defense readies the counterspell. Fight is a word you are assuming into the scene. And the voiceover refuses to look away, because this is where language tries to do the work of time, and time is a stubborn employee. We return to the path one more time because every story that becomes a ritual returns to its altar. The cattails are taller in memory now, the air glossier, the blue light of those early cruisers turned into a permanent bruise in the town's night sky. And in a corner of a mind that won't always say its name aloud, someone sees the beam of a flashlight moving like a surgeon's finger, selecting, deciding, and understands with a cold click why routes become routines, why routines become opportunity for the wrong kind of mind, and the word neighbor sloughs its soft edges and reveals the blade underneath. A person proximate to your life with access to your rhythms, a person trusted to measure your panic and keep it in a notebook. The parents sit at the kitchen table again, the hot plate now gone, replaced by a cork coaster with a church picnic logo, and they read a statement they didn't want to write. They thank the lab for the science, the detectives for the patience, the community for the casseroles, And then the mother says a sentence not meant for news, but the camera catches it anyway. I want the path to stop walking through our house. And the whole town hears it in their marrow because they have all been stepping around an invisible route for decades, from car to sink to couch to window to bed, tracing the same turns she never completed. We close this segment on a room inside evidence where the sneaker lives under plastic, its laces a tired smile, and a file thicker than winter stacked beside it, and the red record light stays on because there will be more. There is always more when you trade certainty for proof, and the voice keeps its cadence, short, tight, urgent, anchored to the beat of a town that's learned headlines are only the opening chords. The melody is months of hearings. The bridge is a jury, and the final chorus is not a verdict, but a quieter street at 2:11 a.m. A dog that barks at ordinary raccoons again, a kitchen clock that ticks like a clock instead of a countdown. Until then, we walk with it. No breaks, no chapters. The camera near the breath and the breath steady. Cold case carried forward like a candle through wind. The calendar grinds forward like a slow train, and each hearing is a small town of its own. Fluorescent sun, flags motionless, the shuffle of papers, a weather pattern. The ex-cop neighbor sits at council table in County Orange, traded for a suit one size too careful, hair clean as a rule book, eyes set in a practiced horizon, while the prosecutor arranges exhibits like a choir, while the defense clicks a pen that sounds like distant hail, and the gallery fills with faces that remember the day everything tilted. Parents in the front row gripping the handles of their grief, the way climbers grip rope. The judge says good morning in a voice that makes morning sound contractual. The stenographer nods. The microphones inhale. The first motion is about the word solved, a word the anchor said, a word the town needed, a word the defense says is prejudicial, as if language itself were a weapon smuggled past security, and in this building it often is. The prosecutor counters that headlines are not evidence, that jurors will be sculpted into neutrality by instruction and oath, and the judge raises a hand that stills everyone like a stoplight, grants in part, denies in part, a Solomon for commas. Outside, on those courthouse steps that have become the town's new stage, a fresh cluster of microphones waits for a statement, like gulls waiting for bread, and the parents do not come out. They have learned to ration their words, to spend them only where they gain interest, in private, in prayer. Back in the lab, a second analyst steps into the story, sleeves pushed to elbows, the kind of person who does not like adjectives, only numbers. And she explains in the language of peaks, drop in, drop out, stutter, that the profile beneath the nails lived long enough to be heard if you amplify with care and if you treat your contamination ghosts like real ghosts until they prove otherwise. She shows her controls like a carpenter, shows joints, precise, interlocking, and the defense frowns not at her competence but at her comfort, because confident science is a hard tune to drown out. Then a new motion arrives like a sudden draft. The defense wants access to the case notes of every detective who touched the file, wants to examine thought for bias, wants to peel back the human wrapping of the investigation and find the fingerprints of certainty laid too soon. The judge allows it with redactions, which is saying light, but not full sun. The voiceover slips down a hallway to the evidence room again because rooms are characters too, and this one is lined with boxes like unplayed chess games, each marked with a name or a date or a map square. And in the corner, the sneaker rests under plastic like a small museum piece that people change around but never dust. And next to it, the file that grew a spine. Tabs sprouting like wild grass, canvas, interviews, lab again, vigil, tips, river, car wash, and a thin new tab named Grant, the budget line that put a second life into old cotton, a testament to how money can make memory sing. The detective, older and thinner now, walks past the boxes and touches none, a superstitious surgeon, then carries out a manila folder that has not seen daylight since the year ringtones were monophonic. Inside is a note logged by a dispatcher on the night, a call from a number 3 houses away from the ex-cop neighbor. A report of a scream, not quite a scream, more like a breath inhaled too fast, logged at 2:09 a.m., 2 minutes before the VCR froze. 2 minutes the town has spent decades trying to either lengthen into hours or compress into seconds. The note was followed the next morning. Canvassed, concluded, inconclusive, and then the flood drowned it in paperwork. But here is the ink. Here is the timestamp. Here is the pulse of the night again. A minor character steps forward now because stories hide keys in the pockets of minor characters. The retired dispatcher herself, hair white, hands steady, invited to remember without embellishment. And she does. She says the voice on the phone was tight as kite string. She says the caller could not name which direction the sound came from because night turns everything into a sphere. She says she logged what she could and then watched red and blue slide past her window, and when asked if she recognizes the number, she nods toward the exhibit, a landline that once belonged to a widow whose backyard fence abutted the ex-cop neighbors. And her testimony is not proof, but it is a lamplight placed further down the path. The defense recruits its own light, a forensic consultant with rimless glasses and polite doubt who says that touch DNA is a reckless storyteller when left alone, that what speaks beneath a nail might be a handshake from days before, or a brush in a narrow aisle, and the jurors who will one day sit where the gallery sits today shift in their seats because truth has more than one voice, and sometimes they overlap in a way that sounds like argument. The prosecutor cross-examines with the math, with the rarity of the profile, with the controls that look like glass, and the consultant adjusts his glasses and nods to competence again, which is victory in this room, pause by pause. Outside this careful cage of process, the town continues its side of the plot, which is to live with attention. Parents keep their children off the shortcut like it is still taped with blue. The ice cream stand adds a second camera. The barber keeps the TV low and tuned to weather. The church extends the time of silence in the service by one long breath. And a flyer that once bore a face now bears a date for a memorial that no longer needs. The word hope to justify itself. The voiceover walks those streets at night and picks up what the microphones cannot. The way porch lights now click on half a second faster when a car rolls by. The way house cats pause at windows. The way somebody on the corner always seems to be looking down at a phone that is not receiving any new news. In the background, another machine begins to hum. Genealogy, not because a hit is needed, but because confirmation in a different key strengthens the chord. The lab partners with a team that builds trees from leaves of data, and up grows a branch that bends toward the ex-cop neighbor like a compass needle toward iron, cousins in 2 states, a sibling at a distance, a knot that tightens with each overlapping surname. And while the prosecutor will later decide whether this music is admissible, for now it shapes the confidence of the hand that will point to the defendant and say there is where probability meets plan. The ex-cop neighbor's house gives up more than objects. It gives up silences in the shape of absences. A missing section of handwritten patrol logs from the summer before the night, pages excised along a ruler line, and the station's archive gives up a duplicate microfilm that restores some of what the knife wanted to erase. And there it is. A note that he drove an extra loop past the car wash too often for accident, that his routes turned into rehearsals. The defense says loop is a loaded word, says good policing is repetition married to patience. And they are not wrong, which is why this story holds an audience, because the same habit that catches burglars can also map the habits of their neighbors. We return to the parents because they are the truest metronome. The father takes out the Christmas box in July and says he is not rushing a season. He is anchoring one, that the only way to make time behave is to misbehave first, to hang the red felt and say her name without waiting for a calendar to bless it, and the mother places on the table the varsity jacket the town remembers, fabric that has outlived a person, and she runs her finger over a seam that frayed long before the world did. And for 1 second, the camera we are pretending to be wishes. It could stop rolling so privacy could be a room with the door closed, but the voiceover cannot stop. That is the deal with these cases. The red light stays on until the last echo finds a wall. The court sets a date for a suppression hearing that will decide if certain sentences are allowed to be heard in the Cathedral of Verdict, and the town sets a date for a walk that will cross the shortcut as an act of adoption, claiming the path back from shadow. Hundreds move in a soft river, candles in cups shining in a calculus of small lights, and at the bend near the cattails, someone reads names of other cases that remained cold and some that thawed, and it feels like a ledger being balanced in public. The ex-cop neighbor's attorney files a motion to change venue because shock has made the air here too thick to breathe neutral, and the prosecutor argues that justice should not be obliged to take the scenic route hundreds of miles away. And the judge says he will decide after voir dire, after the questions find out whether a jury can be built from strangers who are not strangers to fear. Meanwhile, the rumor that the neighbor will seek a plea skates around town like a leaf on black ice, slick, fast, mostly false, because he sits still in his cell and orders the same dinner 3 nights in a row and stares at a wall with the concentration of a man learning a map he cannot escape. In a quiet corner of the evidence universe, a hair recovered from the back seat of his car, a hair documented and bagged in 1990s, and then put to sleep by the word insufficient, yields mitochondrial whirls that align with the mother in a way that is not a final chord, but is the note the melody needed, and the lab tech who has given her career to patient listening closes her eyes. We drift just briefly to the boy who once caught baseballs from the neighbor. He is a man now with his own small boy, and one evening he walks to the edge of the yard and looks across the old property line and apologizes to air for nothing he could have done, and then he teaches his son to throw straight and to stop when a stranger asks for directions and to come in when the porch light shivers on, and this is how towns try to heal themselves in rules whispered down like recipes. The voiceover tightens again because a new headline tries to form, the kind that would like to remove question marks from faces. Pre-trial ruling looms, evidence survives challenge, case marches toward jury, but the voice refuses to convert people into grammar. Instead, it carries the sounds of the first night like coins in a pocket. The bark of the dog, the hum of the lights, the delicate crush of dew under a detective's boot. And it brings them to this present, as if present were a room into which we are still arriving. The ex-cop neighbor looks up at the gallery one morning, and his eyes settle on the parents for a heartbeat that stretches. No gesture, no message, just the physics of attention. And the mother's fingers tell a story on the handle of her handbag, a staccato the microphone cannot catch, and in that moment, the case stops being a case and returns to being a vow. That the path will not walk their house forever. The judge returns with an order that says the jury will be found here, that the case belongs to the soil that grew it. That shock is not disqualifying if a mind still wants to think, and voir dire will find those minds. The defense turns a page, the prosecutor unboxes a board, the detective straightens but does not smile. And the town lets out the breath it has been trying to ration since the clock on the VCR froze at 2:11. We end this movement where we began the entire story, in the quiet just before a scream, except now the quiet is full of voices we have learned to hear. Science in its careful shoes, memory with its limping gait, law with its measured steps, grief with its bare feet. The camera that is our listening hovers a foot above the path behind the car wash and watches the cattails bow like parishioners again, and for a second they look like a jury rising as the judge enters. Everyone standing. Everyone held by a structure invented to keep chaos from becoming king. And the voice says, we go on, no breaks, no chapters, until the verdict or the echo, whichever arrives first. Voir dire begins like a harvest. Rows of chairs, faces lit by fluorescent daylight, questions dropped like seeds, to see what might take root, and the voiceover keeps pace with the cadence of a judge who could lull a thunderstorm into order. Do you watch the news? Do you recognize the headline? Does cold case solved mean anything fixed in your mind? Can you hold shock at arm's length? Can you promise to breathe between each word the lawyers hand you? The ex-cop neighbor sits very still because stillness is the last uniform he owns, and the prosecutor studies the jurors with the attention of someone learning a street by dusk, mapping which porch lights wink on when truth knocks, while the defense draws soft circles with a pen cap and asks whether Day feels like a voice from heaven or a human instrument that can play wrong notes, and a woman in the fourth chair says science is a compass, not a destination, and the room does a small, private nod, because sense sometimes sneaks in on flat shoes. Jurors are thanked and excused and returned to lives that will spike with the memory of this room like a bright pin on a map, and others are sworn. 11 plus 1, a dozen hearts asked to become a metronome. The parents sit stony and sunlit from the windows. Nobody opens. Fingers braided. And the voiceover, our camera without a body, stands in the aisle like conscience and records the day the town chose its listeners. Opening statements arrive with the ceremony of first rains, the prosecutor stepping forward with a measured thunder that refuses melodrama, because the facts do that on their own. She paints the night of 1997 in a palette of time stamps and textures. The VCR frozen at 2:11. The sneaker turned like a dropped sentence, the smear that was once a whisper, now a choir. The path behind the car, wash-lined in cattails, like a congregation bowing to a secret, and she promises the jury not certainty, born of guesswork, but probability married to pattern. A route walked too often by a man who knew the dark as if it wore a badge. The defense follows with the smile of a teacher who will quiz you gently and then curve your grade, he says. We are allergic to doubt, but you must invite doubt to dinner here. Says ex-cop is a phrase soaked in bias, says DNA. Beneath a nail is an unruly narrator, says headline words like shock community, want to rent space in your head for free, says solved is a legal illusion until proven, note by note, and the jurors listen with the half-closed eyes of people letting a storm pass through them so they can inventory what remains. Witnesses begin like a procession. The retired dispatcher with hair like winter sun recounts the call logged at 2:09, a breath pulled too fast, a direction impossible to fix because night turns streets into a bowl and the entry on the yellowing card grows new edges under courtroom light. The detective, older and thinned by patience, takes the stand and refuses heroics. He walks the jury through the boxes as if they were rooms in a modest house, admits mistakes of the first week, the way a good parent admits they burned the toast and still served breakfast, and every time he says, we went back, the parents in the front row close their eyes for one beat, and the town hears footsteps in its bones. The lab supervisor steps forward with the calm of a lighthouse and pulls up the peaks, teaches the room that mountains can be music, explains controls and blanks like prayers said before sleep, and when the statistic arrives, it does not shout, it glows, a number so rare you could spend 10,000 human lifetimes in this county and never meet it twice. And the jurors do not cheer, because this is not that kind of place. But one of them touches the edge of the exhibit as if touch could fix meaning in the air. Cross-examination is a polite knife, the defense carving space where uncertainty can sit, asking about drop-in, drop-out, asking whether the smear could be the ghost of pickup or handshake, and the supervisor doesn't flinch. She says, contamination is a fear we fight with ritual, shows the ritual. And the jury learns that science is a church of method, not miracles. Next, a forensic genealogist with a voice like gravel explains the tree that grew from leaves of data, cousins here, a sibling there, how the branches bent toward the defendant like a compass hand, and though the judge allows the testimony only as background, not as a hammer blow, the chord it adds makes the room vibrate with a new color. The ex-cop neighbor watches without blinking, but inside the calm you can feel a draft, like an attic door not quite latched. The prosecution exhibits the old patrol log microfilm, the loop past the car wash too often for accident, and the defense stands on repetition as diligence. And the town in the gallery experiences the strange ache of hearing that both stories could be true until one is chosen to carry the weight. Between witnesses, the camera of our attention slides to the evidence room again, not because it has new secrets, but because rooms remember. The sneaker under plastic with its laces set in a tired grin, the varsity jacket sealed in a way that keeps the smell from escaping, the small box that held clippings squared like a soldier's sheets, and the voiceover asks the quiet question the court cannot accommodate. Why some people curate their lives the way they curate an alibi, why tidiness can be a philosophy or a mask. Back in the pews of justice, a neighbor testifies to the defendant's garden, to the straight lines, to the way he flicked a leaf from a tomato cage as if mess were a moral failing, and no one says the word control, but the word hangs from the ceiling like a light fixture. A store cashier remembers the gum and the tremor in the missing girl's hand and the silence afterward that felt like the pause before a storm decides where to break. And as she steps down, you hear the building settle, wood and concrete and memory aligning for a second into one long exhale. The afternoon brings the small headline that would have filled a column in a local paper 20 years ago if the flood had not eaten the ink. A neighbor down the block remembered a dog barking at nothing, a porch light flicking on twice, and the defense objects that anecdote is not evidence. Sustained, but the pulse of the room has already absorbed it, not as proof, as weather. Then comes the knife wrapped in oilcloth, recovered from a basement workbench, not a murder weapon, not linked by blood, but introduced to sketch a mind that keeps things in bundles. And the judge, careful as a lock, warns the jury about the danger of character masquerading as fact. And the prosecutor nods because she wants the same caution. She wants the verdict to survive winter. As the day folds into evening and the courtroom smells faintly of paper and the cologne of men who have not moved for hours, the ex-cop neighbor's attorney calls a retired sergeant who trained him, a man who says the defendant was meticulous, punctual, reliable on midnights, that he drew boundaries with tape and chalk like a man teaching the street to behave, and the prosecutor's cross finds the seam in the praise, asks whether boundaries drawn that hard sometimes become cages you build for others. And the sergeant blinks again, says the job can turn lines into gods if you let it. In the front row, the mother's hands write another story across the handle of her handbag, and the father stares straight ahead, because if he looks at the defendant, he might begin to imagine the path behind the car wash as a human choice, instead of the abstract cruelty he has used to stay alive. Night unrolls over the town, and still the voiceover does not let go. We ride with it past the ice cream stand, now shuttered for the season, past the barber sweeping hair into tidy crescent moons, past church windows holding the last light like cupped hands, and we hear the private verdict of porches, the micro murmur of people who cannot help but retry the case with the evidence they own, gossip lacquered with dread, relief lacquered with suspicion, and a child's bicycle bell flares in a side street like a memory learning new shape. Because for the first time in years, the town's night feels organized by something other than fear. The next morning, the judge instructs again, like a lighthouse insisting on rhythm, and the prosecutor calls one more witness who is not a person, but a record, a 911 call from a different summer where the ex-cop neighbor answered his own door with a calm that did not match the panic outside, and while it proves nothing by itself, the cadence of that calm hums in the same key as the rest of the case, and jurors feel the undertone in their ribs. The defense rests with a quiet that tries to imply sufficiency, and the court adjourns for the day, and the cameras catch the steps, microphones hungry. But the parents do not speak. They have learned that words are a currency, and they are saving for the last purchase, the only one that matters. And the town, which once spent language like confetti, now pockets syllables and walks home. In the evidence room, an unseen hand turns off a single lamp, and what remains is the glow from numbers sitting in files. And in a kitchen not far away, the mother lifts the red felt stocking and places it on the back of a chair like a crest. And the father, who has never prayed out loud, says a line to the ceiling that is more promise than request. That when the verdict comes, whatever it is, the path will not be allowed to run through this house anymore. And a draft stirs the curtain as if night itself is nodding. The voiceover pulls back to the courthouse where janitors mop a shine onto floors that have learned the weight of this town's feet. and we leave the camera there to reflect doorways. Because tomorrow the math will be resung, the maps will be redrawn, the ordinary will put on its uniform of ritual, and the story will keep walking forward without cuts or chapters until it finds the only kind of period a place like this can accept. Not a shouted solved, but a quieter alignment of breath, proof, and peace. The three elements a community needs to turn a headline from shock to history. And the echo behind the words, "cold case solved," will finally meet its wall and fall asleep. Morning folds open like a file, edges straight, corners blunt, the courtroom filling with the low-tide sound of fabric and paper and breath, and the voiceover steps back into its groove, shortcuts, quick glances, the metronome of justice ticking. The judge takes the bench, and the jurors settle as if their chairs were instruments that need tuning. And the prosecutor says, "Call your next witness," with a steadiness that hides the charge running under the floor. Chain of custody walks in wearing sensible shoes, an evidence technician from a year when the uniforms were a different brown, and he unspools the line from the path behind the car wash to this exact second, seal to seal, signature to signature. How the sneaker went from dew to plastic. How the cotton swab went from leaf to freezer. How the freezer went from old building to new lab when the budget finally remembered the past and the defense listens for phrase, asks about a day when the flood knocked power sideways and the tech admits a gap and then closes it with logs and backups and the same ritual that has turned doubt into discipline for 2 decades. The jurors write, and somewhere a pencil breaks with a small crack that sounds like lightning far away. Next, the path itself testifies by proxy. A crime scene diagram projected on the wall so big it looks like a map to a childhood home. Arrowed lines tracing routes in and out of shadow. Scale bars marching along the bottom like soldiers who never tire. The detective narrates the diagram as if giving directions to someone who has never been to town. Here is where the cattails bow. Here is where the path narrows to a decision. Here is where a shoe print refused to match. Here is where a smear waited 30 years for chemistry to catch up with time, and the jurors lean forward as if the drawing could tip and pour them into that night. We move on the tide of procedure to a name that has hovered like a faint watermark. The boy who caught baseballs from the neighbor, now a man in a clean shirt that does not hide the tremor in his hand. He speaks with the economy of someone allergic to drama. Says that as a kid, he thought the neighbor's lawn was a kind of sermon about order. Says he remembers the flashlight beam the week after the girl went missing. The neighbor running drills across his yard at midnight as if light could be taught a pattern, left, right, left up, and at the time it seemed like concern. Like a person who cannot rest until the dark looks like a grid, and now it looks like rehearsal. And the defense objects to speculation, sustained. And the judge instructs the jury to treat memory like something delicate that can be admired, but not leaned on. The mother watches the man who was once a boy, and the room learns a new stillness from her face. The lab returns as a second voice, another analyst with a different cadence, the one who ran the confirmatory batch months after the first hit hummed the town awake. She speaks about alleles as if she were discussing birdsong, distinct calls overlapping. Stutter that can trick you, drop in that can prank you, but controls that tell you when to call a sound what it is, and she shows the jurors the triplicate runs, the blank lanes clean as glass, and when the statistic rolls across the screen again, it is not a number as much as a landscape you cannot mistake for any other. The defense asks the questions it must about loading amounts, about the possibility that a handshake in a living room 2 days before could travel under a nail to become accusation, and the analyst nods to the physics of transfer, and then points to the pattern in the peaks that says not casual, not ambient, not drift, and the jury does not nod because the judge told them not to, but something in the air nods anyway. We cut to an absence, a witness who is not here because there was never a body to write a report about. The prosecutor faces the emptiness as if it were a person, tells the jury the hardest truth of this case, that grief here has always been bodiless and, therefore, restless, that you will not hear from a medical examiner because the river and the years and the careful mind that plotted this path conspired to keep the town from even the small mercy of a definitive end. The defense listens as if relief might be hiding inside the sorrow, but the prosecutor does not let absence become a refuge. She uses it the way a good carpenter uses a gap, to show you how the rest of the structure carries weight without sagging. A custodian from the station in 1997 takes the stand, a man everyone knows by first name, and he talks about the night after the night, when the ex-cop neighbor signed out a kit to help another precinct canvass, how he returned it early the next morning with wrappers aligned like a place setting, and says he noticed, because he notices small order in a world that spills, and the defense tries to turn it into a compliment, meticulous, reliable, and the prosecutor lets it be both, a habit that catches thieves or maps lives. Lunchtime slides over the building like a thin cloud, and in the hallway, a coffee machine coughs awake, and a juror stares at a bulletin board with flyers for safe driving and blood drives as if they could provide a neutral surface to rest her eyes. Back inside, the defense calls a specialist in cognitive bias, a professor who teaches officers how memory can lay traps, who says that once a name is on a whiteboard, it tends to grow roots, and asks the detective if, after the ex-cop neighbor's name surfaced in early notes, every return to the path became a trip taken with him in mind, and the detective answers with a quiet that has earned him the right to speak. Says yes, there is no courage in denying gravity, but we also chased a dozen other names until our feet blistered, that the list was a hydra, that we cut heads and more grew, that the name we are here about today survived the blade called evidence. The professor remains polite and sharp, and the jury gets its lesson in the limits of certainty, which is the first step toward a durable verdict. The afternoon draws in the town by the shoulders when a neighbor from 3 houses away, the widow with the fence that kissed the ex-cop's yard, brings her landline records and her calendar from 1997, saved because some people keep everything. And she testifies that at 2:09 she called dispatch after hearing a breath pulled too fast, and though she could not place the direction then and cannot now, she wrote a note in the square for that date that says path, car wash, light, and the defense asks whether she writes other notes that turn into stories, and she admits she does. That memory is hungry in houses where the television plays the news too loud, and the jurors learn that honesty can be both frail and strong at the same time. A small item lands like a pebble in a pond, the old tape from a convenience store 1 mile away on a road that leads nowhere you would go at that hour. A tape rescued from a box because a clerk retired and decided to clear out a back room where machines go to sleep. And on the flicker, you can see a car that looks like the defendant's model roll through at 2:03, no plate visible, no driver's face, just the way the headlights skim the curb, and it is not proof, it is weather, and the prosecutor does not oversell it, and the defense does not panic, and the jury learns to live with atmospheres as well as facts. The judge ends the day with an instruction that sounds like a lullaby for reason, reminding the jurors that sympathy cannot sit in a juror's chair, that anger cannot either, that only evaluation may sit there, and yet everyone in the room knows feelings will arrive like uninvited cousins and will have to be ushered to the side table without shaming them. The parents leave by a door that doesn't touch the microphones. Their silence has become a language everyone in town can read now, and it says not yet, not until the last necessary word has been spoken in the only room where words change the shape of nights. Outside, the sky bruises into evening, and the voiceover rides the streets again, noting how the barber locks his door and runs a thumb along the edge of a photo where the parade once rolled past a smiling sheriff, how the ice cream stand's owner counts spoons like rosary beads and then laughs at himself and puts them away, how porch lights practice the old choreography of protection, on, off, on, again, in case someone needs signaling. In the evidence room, a janitor passes and, without touching anything, says goodnight to the boxes the way you say goodnight to sleeping children, because this town has learned to personify what it cannot control, and that is not superstition, that is a survival technique. Back at the jail, the ex-cop neighbor sits with a public defender who has become a private strategist, and they go over the grocery list of doubt. They circle the words transfer and timeline and bias until the paper looks like a map to a buried argument, and then he sits alone staring at the cinder block geometry and practices the face he will wear tomorrow. The face that says steady. The face that says you will not make me narrate your story for you. Night returns. Not like a curtain, but like a slow tide that decides the shape of shorelines without asking. The voiceover stands once more at the path behind the car wash, listens to cattails tell their wind-laced version of events, hears a dog bark, and then settle, because some things have already begun to heal, even while other things wait on the calendar's slow train. The clock in a living room glows 2:11. As it will glow in this story until it is no longer needed as a lantern. The red felt stocking waits on the back of a chair like a flag that refuses to choose half-mast or full. Tomorrow, the courtroom will resume its ritual. One more witness, one more exhibit, one more attempt to haul a night into daylight without breaking it. The town will keep pace, step for step, carrying casseroles and caution, phrases like cold case and shock community worn down to their core meanings by use. And the voice will keep the line unbroken, breath measured, imagery tight, because that is how you carry a listener through a hall of echoes without losing them, because that is how you go on until the verdict or the echo, whichever arrives first. And even then you keep speaking. Softer, so the path never again walks through the house. Dawn inks the courthouse windows, and the town wakes into its ritual with the precision of a rehearsal. Coffee machines exhale, doors hiss open. The gallery fills with the soft thunder of shoes, and the voiceover slips back into the aisle where breath becomes metronome. Because the story refuses to fracture, it insists on one line pulled tight through every hour. The judge calls us to order with a tone that feels like the click of a well-set latch, and the prosecutor rises with a sheet of paper that has been folded and unfolded so many times its fibers look like frost. A transcript from 1997, the ex-cop neighbor's original interview, conducted while the night was still a wound and procedure was an all-weather coat, and she reads passages that once sounded like solid ground. I was home by 9:20. I walked the dog at 10. I watched the late local and made notes. I slept. And then she plays a recording the town has never heard in full. The voice of a younger man who knows what authority is supposed to sound like, even when it is borrowed, and the jury leans into the cadence, not the words, because cadence is where learned calm lives. Then she sets the transcript beside the logs recovered on microfilm and the convenience store flicker and the phone records from a widow's calendar, and the puzzle all but taps the table. 2 minutes here, 3 minutes there, a loop past the car wash that regular nights did not require, and the defense stands quickly. Objection to insinuation. And the judge's hand cuts the air and turns insinuation into caution, reminding the jury that inference must travel on rails laid by evidence, not on suspicions towing trailers of fear. A patrol partner from that year takes the stand, a man who could pass for any coach on any field, and he says the defendant liked the quiet parts of the map, liked to drive them enough to wear the asphalt thin, said it helped him think, said patterns reveal themselves when you thread them often, and there is nothing illegal about that sentence until you aim it at a night where a girl did not get home, and the room absorbs the double edge like a swallow of winter air, sharp but clarifying. The defense counters with a scene from another case that summer where the defendant's loops caught a burglary ring sleeping in their own car, the point clear. Repetition can be vigilance, and the jurors nod inside because rooms like this have taught them to respect two truths until a verdict assigns weight. The lab returns yet again like tide, this time with the mitochondrial whisper from the hair in the back seat, not a finger pointing, a palm open, showing a match to the mother's line that cannot prove identity, but can draw a circle no one expected to stand inside. And the analyst says the circle is not a conviction, it is a context. And the prosecutor lets the humility of that phrasing do its work, because juries trust what does not try to hypnotize them. Mid-morning cracks open for a moment, and the judge allows a short recess, which in a room like this means the hallway becomes a river of low talk, the parents motionless on a bench, as if movement would spill them. And outside, the steps bloom with microphones again, because headlines have their diets to maintain: cold case, shock community, DNA hit, ex-cop neighbor, phrases layered like paint until the wood grain disappears. But today, the parents still do not speak, and the cameras have learned not to bark at their silence. Back on the record, the defense brings forward its sharpest instrument: a cold case consultant with decades in the trade and a mind that looks for the unlit corner, and he lays out an alternative route for suspicion. The way a carpenter lays out a temporary wall, the drifter who camped by the river, the fact that his tent was found flattened after a storm, the unverified sighting of a white pickup in a lot behind the old roller rink, the video store manager's receipts that do not match his memory by 15 minutes if you take the cash-out timestamp as gospel. And he says a phrase jurors know well by now: plausible alternative. And for a minute, the room feels like air just opened a window. Then the prosecutor cross-examines not with speed, but with a craftsman's patience. She walks him through the math that the alternative does not alter: the peaks and controls, the chain of custody that endured a flood because backups existed in rooms without windows, the calendar square that says path, car wash, light, the microfilm loop, the convenience store flicker, and the consultant concedes the architecture, not of guilt, but of likelihood, and the jury reevaluates the shape of its breath. The ex-cop neighbor's attorney asks the question that floats above every trial like a weather balloon: will the defendant testify? And the answer comes back a day later through a whisper of scheduling: not yet, not today, perhaps never. And the voiceover does not dramatize that silence, because silence in this place is not absence, it is strategy. Wearing a suit, and the jury will be told not to read it, and also the jury will feel it anyway, because humans read silences the way they read faces. A small revelation slides in by way of a bank box recovered from the defendant's attic. A key without a label fitting a lock on a storage unit 2 towns over that was rented for a decade and then paid forward by autopilot. The unit now empty, but for cartons of clippings and a plastic bin of cassette tapes labeled patrol tape drills, and a tech resurrects the sound with a machine that clicks like a pocket watch, and it is what it says: drills, a man practicing how to narrate routine. March cadence, street names timed to breath, radio codes spoken like prayer, and somewhere between 27 and 28 minutes in, the cadence slides into the alley behind the car wash. The voice notes, trash pickup schedules, and a dead bulb over a service door, and the rhythm of footsteps after midnight when the laundromat vents exhale. And again the defense objects, foundation, relevance, and the judge lets only the existence of the tape in as context for a mind that practiced. Lunch breaks again, and the town eats in whispers. At the ice cream stand, which opens even on cold days as an act of communal defiance, the owner hands a free scoop to a child and calls it a civic vitamin. And in the barber shop, the TV shows weather maps, while the men talk about nothing important as if language itself needs to be wrung out and hung to dry before afternoon. The next witness is a clerk from a hardware store whose receipt lay quiet in a box for nearly 3 decades, the date stamped, the week after the girl vanished. The items ordinary and sinister by rotation: contractor bags, tape, a flashlight, and the clerk, older now, says every third person buys that combination, and most of them are painting. And the prosecutor nods because the point is not the list, it is the pattern, that in a life arranged like a drawer of tools, choices make a tune. The defense calls a transfer specialist who builds a small world with gloved hands, shows how skin cells move like dust in a room you thought was clean, how shaking hands or passing a cup can plant a speck where accusation will later sprout, and the jurors watch as if someone were teaching them how wind works. And the prosecutor lets the demonstration live for a beat, then returns to the pattern again, to the alleles and the math and the ritual that swatted away contamination like flies from a late summer porch, and it becomes the motif of this day. Transfer is wind. But this felt like breath. The afternoon closes its fist around a moment the town has been anticipating without admitting it out loud. The parents finally speak in the quiet of the courtroom through a victim impact that is not called that yet, because no verdict has been reached. But the judge allows a narrow window to explain the decades of night, to give the jury a map of weight without instructing them to carry it, and the mother stands, hands folded, voice like glass that refuses to shatter. And she does not say monster or hate. She says path, and she says house, and she says we want to walk from sink to window without crossing the night. And in that sentence, the jurors find the reason their chairs matter. The defense declines to cross. When they sit, the room is so quiet you can hear the ceiling breathe. The judge instructs the jury to wash feeling from their hands like surgeons before a long case, to return to evaluation, to stack evidence like bricks, and see if a wall stands that could hold the verdict's roof. Evening leaks into the building and leaves a rind of gold on the flags at the front, and we drift for a moment into the jail where the ex-cop neighbor stares at a bulletin playing internal announcements and then at his fingers. And you can almost hear the click of past routines lining up as if ready to be deployed. But routines have become evidence now, and he knows that better than anyone. In the evidence room, a tech checks the seals on the sneaker again, not because seal checks are required at this hour, but because this town has become ceremonial about the small acts that keep truth clean. And he whispers goodnight to the box, as if boxes learn better when spoken to. The cameras outside catch only the silhouette of the courthouse against a sky that cannot decide between steel and bruise, and the steps empty of microphones for the first time in days because the town has learned to keep its own counsel. On porches, discussions drift toward grocery lists and school projects, and then circle back because the orbit is strong and someone will always say the words "cold case" in a lowered voice, as if the phrase itself were a person who needed sleep. The voiceover returns to the path behind the car wash one more time before the lights go out, because every day ends there now. Cattails breathing, the hush like the inside of a seashell, a dog far off barking at something that is only a branch, not a man, not a plan, not a night cracking open. And we hold on the glimmer of a streetlight that flickers twice and steadies, a tiny parable about how electricity, like community, wavers and recovers. And we take that into the next morning knowing the train of trial will keep moving, witness to witness, ritual to ritual, until closings, until deliberation, until a verdict that will not restore what was taken, but might restore the shape of breath in a kitchen at 2:11. The glowing digits finally demoted to a clock again instead of a lantern, and the path, at last, learning to stop at the edge of the yard. The seventh morning arrives with a colder light, glass gray, as if the sky has been reading transcripts all night and wants everything clean. The courthouse hums to life with the same stubborn ritual, security bins sliding, pens clicking, shoes ticking, and the voiceover resumes its tight gait. No breaks, no chapters. Only breath measured to the rhythm of the room. The judge enters with his weathered calm, and today's first question lingers like frost at the edge of grass. Will the defendant speak? And the answer, at least for this hour, is silence wrapped in strategy. The prosecutor stands and strings a new line through the old night, bringing out a map of radio towers and cell coverage from 1997, a network drawn when pockets held pagers and cars held atlases, and the technician who built those towers testifies to dead zones that weren't dead after midnight, to the way signals bounce along metal ribs of town like echoes learning to be language, and he anchors a small truth. At 2:05, a handset moving on the South Road could have caught a wavering bar near the convenience store before the beam dipped, a detail that doesn't prove a face, but hands the jury a thumbtack for their mental map. The defense remains poised, turning the testimony into atmosphere, not a blade, reminding with a single arched question that technical possibility is not the same as presence, and the jury absorbs the distinction the way a sponge learns salinity. The detective returns, and the room treats him like a clock on the wall, not for charisma, but for consistency, and he talks about the week they reopened the boxes, how they used a checklist, like sailors use stars, how every item was logged, re-photographed, re-weighed, how a smear that once spoke in coughs learned to whisper in sentences under new light, and then he adds something quiet that no one expected. The apology they wrote to themselves on a yellow pad for not catching what the science finally could. Not a legal moment, a human one. And the prosecutor moves on quickly because such sentences are flares, beautiful and dangerous. And the defense later pinches it with tongs, asking whether regret can turn into certainty where only probability should stand. And he answers with that earned quiet, "We let the numbers do the work. We let the pattern build its own bones," and the jurors, who have started to hear the difference between a sermon and a blueprint, tuck that away. Midday drifts in, and the judge calls a sidebar that swallows the room's sound for 5 long minutes. Murmurs braided, hands on mouths, paper sliding like small tectonics. When voices return, the ruling lands with the soft heaviness of a blanket. Portions of the patrol tape drills can be contextualized but not performed for the jury. The mind that practiced routine is relevant. The content that edges toward narration of this crime is not. And each side claims a sliver of victory because trials are built from slivers that either sharpen into knives or settle into dust. The ex-cop neighbor finally stands, not to testify, but to shift in place, the first unprescribed movement he has allowed himself in days, and the gallery leans a fraction as if a boat has taken a small wave. His attorney rises and calls a psychologist of demeanor, a witness who studies the theater of calm, who tells the jury that stoicism under stress is as learned as panic, that officers are trained to lower their pulse the way singers are trained to find pitch, that lack of visible grief in a uniform is not admission, but a function of the job's strange catechism. And the prosecutor nods along to half the sermon and then opens the other half, asking whether control at the surface sometimes correlates with control under it. And the psychologist concedes the correlation without granting causation. An honest tension that leaves the room holding both sides like two handles on the same bucket. After lunch, the air returns to its thin, metallic taste, and the defense lines up its cleanest arrows. A lab auditor who parsed the run sheets like liturgy checks for contamination, for batch drift, for any ghost in the machine that might dress as certainty. The auditor compliments the lab's rituals, the way a rival chef praises a disciplined kitchen, and then, almost with disappointment, admits she found nothing sharp enough to draw blood, a concession disguised as critique, and the jurors feel a small, private click, as if a gear found its mate. The prosecutor's redirect is 2 questions long, the sort that sound like a porch light flicking on. If you found error, you would say it. And since you did not, are we still looking at a skyline of peaks that require the defendant's profile to sing the harmony? And the auditor's answer is so clean, it barely leaves a footprint. Yes, a janitor polishes the brass at the back doors while the next witness takes an oath, a young patrol officer who was a child in 1990 and carries the case like a family story. And he testifies not to the night, but to the memorial walks that began years later, to the way the path behind the car wash turned from a cut-through into a lit corridor, to the motion sensors the town voted to install as if it could wire itself against fate. And while none of this is evidence, the judge lets a sliver through as context for community harm, a thin window the law sometimes opens to let grief breathe without turning the room into a church. When the officer steps down, the parent's eyes shine in a way that is not tears, exactly, but a sheen like varnish, the surface that keeps wood from forgetting its grain. Then comes the hinge. The room has been hearing in its sleep. The defense announces that the defendant will not testify. The judge gives the instruction he has practiced in his bones. That silence from the accused is a right sealed in firmament, that no inference shall perch on that branch. But the air changes anyway, because humans are instruments built to hear what is not played. The prosecutor does not smile, and the defense does not slip. Both teams have gamed these possibilities on whiteboards in rooms with bad coffee, and now it is simply part of the street they must walk together. The last evidence witness is the oldest kind, paper. The clerk lays out certified copies of storage rental agreements, bank autopay statements, the quiet choreography of a decade that kept a unit open like a lung, empty now, echoing then. And the prosecutor resists the urge to turn paper into motive and does the plainer work of pinning dates to a wall and the defense resists the urge to dismiss paper as air, and does the plainer work of reminding that empty rooms are rarely confessions, and the jury watches the duel of patience with a species of respect that feels new in towns like this. Respect for the fact that a verdict is built less like a thunderclap and more like a bridge. The day's light thins to a pale ribbon, and the judge, who has become a steward of everyone's stamina, signals that tomorrow will be closings, that the drums will roll at last, that each side will braid its ropes and throw them across the same span to see which one holds. He tells the jurors to go home and not talk and not read and not think in ways that can be measured, a paradox they have been living since the first question of voir dire, and they nod as if agreeing to invisible vows. Outside, microphones rally on the steps, lean forward as the attorneys pass, and they are fed what the day permits. Phrases like, "We respect the process and we look forward to presenting argument." Words that sound like packing material around something fragile, and then the cameras swing to the parents, and the parents do not stop. Their silence now a trench no one crosses without permission. The town moves in its circuits. The barber sweeps a last crescent of hair and flips the sign. The ice cream stand hands out 2 cups to teenagers holding hands with the trying not to be seen posture of people new to any public. The church listens to its own settling wood and decides to ring a bell tomorrow at noon with no label attached. One note to remind a place that breath coordinates more than applause. Night sets its table. In the jail, the ex-cop neighbor lies on his bunk and stares at the seam where wall meets ceiling, where lines meet rules, and practices the calm he has taught himself to wear like a second skin, while his attorney runs a fingertip down the margins of tomorrow's script, trimming, not fat, superstition. In the evidence room, the sneaker sleeps in its plastic and a tech checks the seal again, a habit now indistinguishable from prayer, and whispers goodnight, because that is what this town does for its dead and for its proof. It offers small courtesies in rooms with fluorescent skies. The voiceover walks the path behind the car wash because endings must rehearse themselves, cattails bending in an invisible congregation, the faint whir of a security light resetting, the distance dog learning again to bark at only branches and raccoons. And in that ordinary animal sound there is a promise, faint as starlight, that the verdict, whatever it becomes, will be an instrument, not a resurrection, a tool to cut a doorway where a wall has been standing for 28 winters. The camera we are pretending to be lifts a foot and hovers over the place where the sneaker lay, and notices that in certain angles even absence shines a lesson the parents mastered long ago and the town is only now catching. And then the frame drifts toward a kitchen where a red felt stocking hangs from a chair back like a banner. At half memory. And the clock on the stove reads 2:11 in the afternoon, not the night, daylight claiming the number as if to retune it. And the mother touches the seam of the varsity jacket and says a name into the air with the plain strength of someone who will never again let the path walk through the house. Tomorrow the speeches will braid facts and fear and math and restraint into 2 ropes, and the jury will try to walk across both without falling, and the voice will go with them, short, urgent, image-laced, ready to turn shock into history and cold case into a past tense. The town can finally put in a drawer, and when the day closes on closings, we will listen for a new kind of quiet. Not the quiet before a scream, but the quiet of a room that has finally said all it can and must let 12 hearts and 1 law finish the sentence that started with a sneaker tipped like a dropped line in Ohio, 1990. Morning brightens like a white sheet pulled tight over a table. And the courthouse accepts it. Fluorescent sky steady, flags a little stiffer, as if fabric has learned the grammar of this room. The voiceover takes its place along the aisle where footsteps join to become a metronome. Because today is argument day, the careful braiding of every scrap of fact and echo the town has carried for 28 winters, and the judge sets the tone with a warning that is really a blessing. What you will hear is not evidence. What you will hear is a map. Follow it only where the landmarks are real. The jury nods in the simple choreography of civic ritual, and the prosecutor steps into the rectangle of light worn smooth by 1,000 other cases, but none like this one. And she begins not with thunder, but with a whisper that travels farther, a reminder of a kitchen clock that froze at 2:11, a sneaker turned sideways like a dropped line, a path behind a car wash where cattails bowed to a secret, and a community that learned to pronounce the phrase cold case without letting it turn to stone in their throats. She lays out the bones in order. Chain of custody that survived flood and budget winters, partials that learned to sing full under new chemistry, peaks that rose in a skyline so particular that the probability number glows like a distant city at night, not a miracle. A method done 3 times with clean blanks like glass, and she touches each corroborating light with a fingertip rather than a fist, the microfilm log that shows the loop past the car, washed too often for chance, the convenience store flicker where headlights skim a curb at 2:03, the landline call from the widow's fence line at 2:09, the interview transcript whose careful cadence fails to account for minutes that matter, and the storage unit that breathed on autopay for a decade because some lives are kept in boxes even when those boxes hold only echoes. Then she kneels the case to eye level and says what courts forget when they crave clean blueprints. That absence is not a favor, that a body withheld by time and water and a plan does not make the physics of that night any less heavy. That the rules of proof do not require the river to return what it took in order to let a jury assign weight. Her voice does not swell when she looks at the defendant. It narrows. It becomes a scalpel. She tells the jury what the science can say and what it cannot. That the DNA beneath the nails does not script intent, but it scripts proximity at the violent heart of the struggle. That the hair's mitochondrial echo does not name a face, but draws a circle the mother shares. That transfer exists like wind, but this pattern feels like breath, personal, close, synchronous. And she returns to ritual, to controls, to blanks, to the kitchen of method where errors do not survive because cooks clean as they cut. She lets the genealogy stand as background harmony, not a solo, branches that bend toward the same name, a compass needle that cannot help itself. And then she uses the word that the defense hates because it is both humble and inexorable. Pattern, a route rehearsed under the cover of helpfulness, a mind that gridded darkness, a collection of order masquerading as safety that became a cage built for someone else. And the room feels the click of a metaphor becoming evidence because the facts have been carried long enough to harden into architecture. She does not ask the jury to feel, she asks them to measure, to stack each brick and step back and ask whether the wall stands straight enough to carry a verdict's roof. And then she gives them the sentence that is almost too simple for television and therefore perfect for a room where truth must survive weather. He was there when she fought. And the words sit in the air without a flourish, and you can almost hear the ceiling lower to meet them. She ends not with the town's grief, but with its breath, with the wish that a kitchen can be a kitchen again and a clock can keep hours instead of ghosts. And the jurors hold still in a kind of reverence that has nothing to do with church and everything to do with the relief of structure. The defense rises into that cooled air with the smoothness of someone who has practiced in mirrors and in showers and in the quiet back seat of a car in the parking lot, and he refuses to fight the prosecutor's tone with heat. He mirrors it with water, asks the jury to examine the map and demand more landmarks, says the word solved has been living rent-free on the courthouse steps and in living rooms, and that you must evict it before you sit in that room with the closed door, insists that probability is not presence, and presence is not guilt, that alleles can travel like pollen, that the night the town has been walking for 30 years is wider than a single set of footprints, and that the drifter's tent, the white pickup, the video store clock that stutters by 15 minutes, are not ghosts, but uncut threads. He points to the auditor who found ritual, but no flaw, and turns it on its side. Says good rituals can still produce mistaken conclusions when human eyes assemble the collage and tilt it toward a suspect they wrote on a whiteboard early. He brings up the psychologist of demeanor and asks the jury to unlearn the easy theater of calm equals cold, panic equals innocence. He reminds them the absence of a body makes staging easier for doubt, because doubt loves rooms with missing furniture. He strings the words stochastic and transfer and handshake like beads and asks them to imagine a dozen mundane ways a skin cell could ride to a nail without a struggle. And then he leans into the rights, into the instruction the judge has already rehearsed with them, that silence in the defendant's chair cannot be invited to speak, that the Constitution pulled that chair up to the table with deliberate hands. His voice does not break, but it bends when he describes the gravity of locking a man away on what he calls the sediment of time and inference and science that he argues is still a poet. Even when it dresses in lab coats, he asks them to vote for uncertainty and to call it wisdom. And though the room is built to resist applause, you can feel a ripple when he frames acquittal, not as blindness, but restraint. He ends with a sentence that is more rhetorical than true, but still lands with the soft thud of crafted argument, that a verdict of not guilty does not exile the town's story. It merely refuses to assign a single author. And he sits, and in the second before the judge speaks, the building seems to take inventory of its own beams. The judge's instructions follow like tide maps scribbled in careful ink, definitions of reasonable doubt and how it breathes, warnings about sympathy and anger, and headlines that want to sneak into deliberations through coat sleeves, strict reminders that lawyer speech is guide, not gospel, that evidence is the only furniture allowed in the jury room, that charts and exhibits can be carried in, but gossip must be checked at the door with phones and watches. And then the clerk gathers the notebooks like a librarian closing stacks, and the bailiff guides 12 people and one alternate into the chamber where strangers become a single instrument. The door shuts with the thump of a book returned to a shelf, and silence grows a spine. The voiceover does not follow them inside because walls matter, but it listens from the corridor the way towns do, interpreting footsteps, counting bathroom trips, reading the ritual of sandwiches delivered on paper plates, the small diplomacy of who reaches for which exhibit first, and it drifts out the doors to the steps where microphones wait and get nothing but the breath of an afternoon that does not know whether to be bright or overcast and decides to be both. The parents choose a bench in the shade where the camera does not quite reach, and the mother holds the seam of the varsity jacket with 2 fingers, the way one holds a note to keep it from flying away. And the father watches a traffic light cycle and then cycle again, and his eyes learn patience as if it were a new language. Inside the jury room, we cannot be, and yet we can imagine the slow choreography of reason, because this is not magic, it is furniture and paper and the ancient speech of ordinary people. A teacher who takes the foreman slip and declines it, a mechanic who takes it and blushes and says we should start with the elements, a nurse who says let's list what we all think we heard without interrupting, a cashier who asks for the transcript page where 211 becomes not a myth but a log line, an IT technician who draws the diagram of the path from memory and is surprised to see he remembered the scale bar, and a retiree who opens with the humble sentence that often saves rooms like this. I could be wrong. They argue not about mathematics first, but about the weight a number can carry when the rest of the world refuses to sit still. And then they argue about the loop, whether routine is vigilance or rehearsal, about the tapes labeled drills, whether practice is devotion or appetite, about the storage unit, whether a decade of paid emptiness is nothing or a shrine to control, and the foreman scribbles on a legal pad a list that looks almost like a poem: sneaker, smear, peaks, log flicker, fence, drills, unit, jacket, stocking, and then he crosses out the last 2 because the judge told them they are context, not load-bearing, and he draws a line under the rest. Afternoon thins. The court reporter stretches her hands in the hallway and smiles at a bailiff as if to remind her wrists that they are more than engines for other people's sentences. The prosecutor sits with a team at a table in a windowless room and stares at a blank whiteboard because she knows better than to pre-write victory or defeat. The defense lawyer paces 7 steps and turns and paces 7 steps because he knows better than to sit still with his own thoughts. The ex-cop neighbor folds a paper cup until it becomes a small white star, with edges too sharp to keep, then flattens it and asks for water again. Evening leans a shoulder against the building, and the bell that the church promised rings once without a label, a single note that lands like a hand on a shoulder, not a shove, a reminder that breath and verdict both require timing. The microphones wake up as if someone tapped them and asked questions into air that answers with wind, and a boy on a bicycle rides past with his seat too high and his determination too loud. And the town smiles without meaning to, because the ordinary has a way of surviving under the tarp of catastrophe until it is needed again. In the evidence room, a tech checks the sneaker seal because checking seals has become a way to stay sane, a rosary of plastic and initials, and whispers, "Good evening," like a joke, and not a prayer, because sometimes humor is the last honest ritual left. He straightens a stack of photographs, the shoe print that refused to match, the cattails that knelt, the blue strobes mirrored in dew, and he turns off one lamp and leaves one on, a compromise between fatigue and worry. The first note from the jury room arrives just before dusk, a request for the lab supervisor's exhibits, the triplicate runs and the clean blanks and the probability number like a lighthouse seen through rain, and the judge sends it without comment because comment is the enemy of law at this hour. A second note asks for the patrol log, microfilm copy, and the diagram of the path, and the courtroom awakens enough to lay them out like a museum, and the bailiff carries them across the carpet with the same grip she uses on a newborn's car seat. Not reverent, careful. Night finally presses its face to the windows, and the lights hum a little louder, and the judge calls the jurors back only to say goodnight and return them to their undisclosed pillows, because deliberation is a muscle that can cramp, and tomorrow is a better chance at clarity than a midnight drowned in coffee. The town releases a breath it did not know it had been holding for 9 hours and goes home to kitchens where clocks read times without double meanings, to porches where light switches work like switches, to beds where sleep remembers how to arrive without asking permission from fear. The voiceover walks of the path behind the car wash because the line must not break, cattails breathing like parishioners again, security lamps doing their slow blink and steady, the dog in the distance announcing a raccoon with exactly enough energy to be believed, and the ground underfoot is just ground, no longer an altar. Not yet a road with a new name, and we hold the frame there until quiet ceases to feel like threat and returns to being a texture. Then we drift toward the parents' window, where a red felt stocking still hangs on a chair back like a flag of occupation that a verdict might finally lower, and the mother, for the first time in many nights, sleeps without her hand on the seam of the varsity jacket, and the father dreams not of the path but of fixing a leaky faucet, because that is how hope visits in chores. Tomorrow they will file back in, 12 and 1, and the judge will ask if they have reached a decision. And the microphones will point their metal beaks like curious birds, and the town will hold itself steady in the way it has learned, and the voice will be there, short, urgent, image-laced, ready to carry whatever words arrive without dropping the life inside them, because the story refuses applause. It wants only alignment, breath with proof, community with peace, and the echo called cold case shifting at last from headline to history.